Good morning or good afternoon. Today we'll be watching a video on Quizzette 604. As always, please make sure that you write your last name, comma, first name, today's date, and the class color. Today I'll say that I am purple. So write your last name, comma, first name, today's date, which is the 9th, and the class color, I already said I would be purple. Okay, number one, you're going to have to complete the sentence using the vocabulary. You can use your textbook for this. If you need your textbook while working on this throughout the day, throughout the week, at the beginning of the period, just raise your hand quietly and I'll distribute them. Number one, to find the absolute value of a number, find the blank from 0 and write the distance as a blank integer. So sometimes with these sentences, it gives you the answer if you read carefully. So it says, to find the absolute value of a number, find the blank from 0 and write the distance. And it's kind of funny because that's the answer. So you find the distance from 0 and write the distance as a positive integer. I'll give you an example and go ahead and write this down. The absolute value of -5 is just the distance away from 0, which is 5. And the absolute value of 5 is also just 5 units. Those both numbers are positive. So the answer, the solution to absolute value questions is just always going to be positive. Number 2, it says plot -1/2 and 1 3/4 or 1 3/4 on the number line. So we're going to plot, first, we're going to plot -1/2. So if you look at our number line, it's actually already divided up for us into fourths or quarters. So if you look here, I'm at 0. There are 4 steps before I get to a whole number of 1. And the same way on the negative side, there are 4 steps before I get to -1. So they divided up our number line for us, and you can always do this. They divided it up by fourths or by quarters. So go ahead and write this down with me. The first one is -1/4, -2/4, -3/4, and then -4/4. Well, that's just -1. And then you can also think of this one right here, -2/4. If you reduce that, that just equals to -1/2. -1/2. I know that's kind of small, so if you can't see that, let me go ahead and write it a little bigger. So in the same manner, when I go on to the positive side, this is 1/4. This is 2/4, but I already told you 2/4 can be reduced to 1/2. And then after 2/4, it's 3/4 and then 4/4. But 4/4 can be reduced into 1. So 4/4 is also equal to 1, and that's why it's there. Now, if I continue counting, this is 5/4, 6/4, and if you reduce this, that should be 2/4, which actually equals 2.5. I'm sorry, that's 1.5. That should be 1 and then 1.5. And then now counting from 6/4, we have 7/4 and then 8/4. And 8/4 is actually 2, and that's why we have 2 right there on the number line. So dividing up number lines by fractions and decimals is something you guys need to know. This is what you're going to get tricked on. Remember I told you in 6th grade and even in 7th grade, a lot of the things that you guys see are not easy numbers like 1, 2, 3. They're typically going to be a fraction. Now, fortunately for 6th grade, your fractions are always most likely going to be thirds, halves, fourths, and sixes. They're never going to be something like 2/13. They're always going to be like 2, 4, 6, or 3, or just like easier numbers that are less than 10. So that's the nice thing about 6th grade. 7th grade is when they throw you these odd fractions that try to throw you off. But you can still do it. All right, back on task. So plot -1/2. So -1/2 is actually right here, where -2/4 is, because that reduces to -1/2. Now, the other one is 1 3 3/4. So if we look over here, 1 3/4 would be, actually we have to turn these into mixed fractions. I can tell you what it is, but for instance, like this one right here, 5/4 is 1 1/4. And then 7/4, this is how you figure it out. You do 7 divided by 4. 4 goes into 7 one time. You have left over 3, and so you do 3/4. So 7/4 is equal to 1 3/4, which is what we want. I gave you the hardest example on the first day because the other ones are going to be easy to see. Easier to see. So I'm going to start you off on number 2 just so you're not really thrown off. So if you count how many ticks we have between 0 and 1, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So this is cut up into 6s right here. So I'm going to start it off. You have 1/6, 2/6, 3/6, 4/6, 5/6, and then what's the last one? 6/6. 6/6 is just 1. And then you keep going. 7/6, 8/6, and so on and so forth. And then you reduce the fractions you can and plot the ones that they give you. Okay? Number 3 on Monday, we're going back up here, so make sure you go back to Monday, number 3. Find the value of x. Write your answer as a decimal number, as a decimal. So let's look here. We have 9, and then we have 10. So how many ticks are between 9 and 10? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Okay, so there are 10 ticks between them. So we know that it's divided up into a tenth. So a tenth in decimal form is right here. It's in increments of like 10 cents. Think of 10 cents. So if you have 9, if you're moving to 10 cents to the right, it'd be 9.1, 9.2, 9.3, 9.4. Go ahead and continue. 9.5, 9.6, 9.7, 9.8, 9.9. And then if you add 10 cents to 9.9, that gets you 10. So what is the mystery number? What is x equal to? It's equal to 9.4. So now you have seen your number lines can be divided up by decimals and by fractions. You just have to count the amount of ticks between the numbers and then decide from there what it's doing it by 10 cents, by tenths. So number 4 says, put the following sequence of integers in order from least to greatest. So it looks like the questions that you might have seen from last week, but they're a little different. So from least to greatest. So that part is correct. So the least to greatest. So let's put these in order. Remember that the absolute value of a number is just the distance it is away from 0. So the absolute value of 3 is actually 3. And the absolute value of -2 is 2. So keep that in mind. So we have -5. We have the absolute value of 3, which is 3. 4. We have the absolute value of -2, which is just 2. Keep that in mind. And then we have -12. So now let's put them in order. The biggest negative number I have is -12. So it's -12. Then it's -5. And then remember, the absolute value of -2 is 2. So 2 is next. But you're going to write the absolute value of 2. You're not going to write that purple. You're going to write the absolute value of -2 because you know it's just 2. And then the next one is 3, which is absolute value of 3. And then the last thing that you have is 4. That is the correct order. So unfortunately, I would like to just put 2 and I would like to just put 3 instead of writing the absolute value. But you need to have the absolute value symbols because mathematicians want to make sure that you know what the difference is. So you have to write it. Okay, that is a correct way to list these. Be careful with number 4 every day, because you're going to be tempted to write the number without the absolute value lines. Remember, absolute value has those lines, straight lines. You can even do them bold so you remember.